This is Dateline News and Conversation. Tonight, the Hunter Biden-linked Burisma oil company, gas company in Ukraine, has been linked to terrorist attacks in Russia. We're going to talk about Russian offensive, daily missile strikes all over Ukraine, and Russia is using their new FAB guided bombs that are devastating. Some of them weigh as much as 1,500 and 3,000 kilograms. We're also going to talk about a report from Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, America's largest bank. It's a dire forecast for the United States and Western economy. My guest tonight, Stas Krapivnik from Moscow. Stay with us. Stas, welcome back to the show.
Welcome. Always feels welcome. So,
yeah,
welcome to my office.
Thank you very much. Because news from Russia, Moscow, and from you, a trusted analyst, not just by me, but you've got several outlets in Russia national television that you are working with. Let's get right at it. The big news, it just broke a few hours ago. Burisma, that Hunter Biden was on their board making who knows how much money, has been tied by the Russian investigators to terrorist attacks in Russia with U.S. dollars funding it. What can you tell me about this?
Well, first of all, let's remember what Burisma is. Burisma is a money laundering scheme that looks like a company. Hunter Biden was on the board of directors of its main business at that point, as far as we knew, was the oil and gas. So Hunter Biden's was on the board of this company with absolutely zero knowledge in oil and gas or any experience. And Biden Sr., the corruptor in chief, when he was just starting to run for president, he gave a nice little spiel to the journalists about how when he flew there, the prosecutor general of Ukraine had opened up a case against his son and the board of directors of Burisma. And he said, I told Poroshenko, if you don't fire that son of a bitch, you're not going to get $1 billion more. And by the time I flew out there, he fired that son of a bitch. Well, yeah, and the journalists just all stood there going, because right there, Biden had already admitted to various criminal acts. So, of course, the U.S. government is all about the rule of law for the serfs and the freedom to do whatever the hell you want for the elites. So, of course, Hunter Biden, or rather Biden Sr., wasn't in charge with anything. He just became president after stealing an election. And Sonny Boy, who can commit any crime he wants, including having sexual relations with underage girls around 12 years old, he gets away with it. But then when this all started, we also found out that Burisma also was running, for the U.S. government, was running illegal military biolabs all over the place. So Burisma was in everything. And it's just a center of corruption. So that it's funding, along with any other major holding in Ukraine, is funding terrorist activity shouldn't be any big surprise. And that the Bidens are up to their necks in the blood of innocents all over the world shouldn't be any surprise. They're an extreme criminal, degenerate clan that sprung up from another criminal, degenerate clan called the Obamas and the Clintons. So what can you say?
So do you think this money that was paid to these Tajiks to commit the massacre at the Crocus City Hall was coming from Burisma. Has Russian government investigators said that? Because all I read was they have evidence that they've been funding terrorism across Russia. Do you know if it's been linked with the Crocus City Hall?
Whether or not Burisma directly funded Crocus City, well, no, they're doubt of it's a very big doubt that they would have funded directly. They would have given up funding and money over to the SBU, and the SBU would have funded these guys. So, I mean, it would have gone for chains. That's how usually money like that runs. You got to remember, there's also a lot of criminal activity run, internet criminal activity run by Ukraine. A lot of the various criminal calls, they're trying to scam calls. They're trying to get money out of people all over Russia. They're run by Ukrainian companies or Ukrainian organizations. They have been for years, way before all this conflict started. Ukraine is just a center. It is a pigsty. Ukraine is a dirty, nasty little pigsty. A country that came out of the Soviet Union with a industrial base and an economy the size of France's, that turned to a point where the president of Uganda was very offended when somebody compared Ukraine's economy to Uganda. He said, "No, we're much bigger and better than they are. Don't compare us." A country that is nothing but corruption. Countries built on a foundation of corruption, murder, genocide. That's what you have. That's what you have, and that's the bastard child of America and the UK and NATO. Anything those countries and their elites touch, pardon my French, turns to shit. It turns to very satanic with that.
Yeah, it's really terrible what's happened to that country since the breakup of the Soviet Union. It was an industrial and an agricultural powerhouse. Is there anything new being reported about the Crocus City Hall investigation? The latest I've got, they've detained another 10 or 11 Tajiks who they've connected to this. Do you have anything further you can add to that?
Well, not really right now. I mean, it's still ongoing. They're still making arrests. It's obvious that there were these guys are about as professional as Christ. I can't even compare anything to their level of professionalism. They came in a white car with a black top. They ran out of into a white car with a black top. They didn't switch to a new car. They didn't ditch their phones. They didn't wipe their phones. And all their communications were on their phones with their Ukrainian handlers. So, I mean, this is flat out. And the longer and louder the U.S., Macron, and the rest of the stooges, the satanic West, scream it wasn't Ukraine, it was Ukraine. And the only reason they're screaming because it was them behind Ukraine. And payback's coming. One way or the other, payback's coming. Yeah. It's going to be an individualized payback. So if I were any of those people, or at least people close to them, I mean, the presidents have their own bodyguards. But people like Nuland, in her place, I would definitely be looking over my shoulder from here to the end of her days, because payback's got to come, and payback's got to come not from some small organization, but from one of the biggest countries in the world. So that has deep pockets. Yeah, much deeper than the people around Nuland.
Boy, it's really a dangerous time we're living in. They just keep escalating all the time. Now, I want your comments about the Russian offensive, and it has to be called an offensive because they have been attacking Kiev long since the massacre on March 22nd. But since March 22nd, the missile strikes and the bombings have intensified. They're hitting all kinds of command and control centers, even in Kiev. They are hitting factories that are producing these large drones somewhere in the Odessa Oblast near the coast. They're knocking out the electrical grid, hydroelectric power plants, anything connected with the military, including troops. Russia has been attacking. But the one thing I'd like you to comment on, in addition to that, it's being reported that Russia now has been using its FAB, FAB bombs that are guided with correction modules so that Russian fighters can fire them 30 to 40 kilometers away from the target, and they're extremely precise. In your opinion, is this a game changer? Because it's being reported that Ukrainians are terrified of these bombs.
Well, first of all, most of the targets that you've mentioned have always been targets, and Russia has been hitting them for 2.5 years on and off. And definitely any troop concentrations, definitely any headquarters. What's changed with that is it's not even the intensity. Well, it is an intensity because Russia was husbanding missiles and bombs during the winter, and now is is shaping the battlefield. And shaping the battlefield because there's going to be a big offensive coming. There's a continuous offensive all up and down the line of contact, and Russian forces are moving forward. Some places, maybe a couple tens of meters in a day. Some places a kilometer in a day, which is not well, by the standards of the last 2.5 years, which is a pretty big standard of movement. Since February. Toward the end of January, it's been about 420 square kilometers taken, or rather than taken, the better word would be liberated. Now, what's happening right now, as part of shaping that battlefield, is Russian munitions are destroying the electric grid in places like Kharkiv. It's making it impossible for civilians to stay there. So civilians have started fleeing, which does several things. One, it removes civilians from the battlefield because Kharkiv is going to be the battlefield, the next big battlefield. And there's going to be an offensive coming, and it's not going to be an offensive coming across the present line of contact. It'll be coming from, more likely from the north, probably from two sides of Kharkiv, northwest and northeast of Kharkiv for the Pitcher movement, something around those areas, which will also help to roll up the Ukrainian front that runs up to Belgorod's Oblast, down the northern portion of the front line, the contact line, and it'll just roll that downward. So Ukrainians stay in their positions. They're going to get caught between two Russian forces. They'll be basically pincered in from three sides, and that force is just going to keep rolling downward. So what you're doing now is like I said, you're isolating the battlefield. You're removing the civilian population. So one, you're not going to have as many civilian casualties. Secondly, what's happening is as the civilians are fleeing the city, and that's a city of almost 2 million people. As the civilians are fleeing that city, they're choking up the logistics on their way out. So moving logistics in becomes much more difficult. And the amount of roads they can handle, especially the heavy Western equipment, becomes much more limited. So it's easier to strike in those regions. So you're removing, and then you're also removing another problem for Russia, because once Kharkiv is taken, the civilians are in place. They need to get fed, and that's a lot of civilians in one jump. Now those civilians, those headaches are moved on to further on Ukraine. True, once this war is over or once this area is settled, a lot of civilians will return to Kharkiv because most of them are Russians. But for now, it's more effective if they're pushing east and southeast, clogging up the supply lines and creating problems for logistics in Ukraine. Especially if they're not being fed, they're going to start rioting. And the more issues for Ukraine's government, the better. So that's part of it. Now for the FAB. Just so your viewers understand, it's a JDAM. That's the American name for FAB. Same thing. It was actually the U.S. that came up with it, taking dumb bombs with old iron bombs, gravity bombs, whatever you want to call them, and then putting a guidance section on it that goes on the nose, and then you put a wing package behind that goes underneath, and the bomb flips over, and the wings go on top when it's free fall. And basically, it becomes a glider. It becomes a very big glider. Now, the U.S. used or gave Ukraine those JDAMs back in beginning of 23, and they used them, and yeah, they were effective against Russian defensive lines. But the electronic warfare units on the Russian side very quickly developed countermeasures, and were able to ground those JDAMs or those FOBs into fields and well away from targets. Basically, they do one of two things. They start feeding the guidance system false coordinates, so it starts trying to circle around, find where it's at, trying to return to where it's supposed to be at, so it just drops. Works the same way in missiles, they'll just run out of fuel. Or it gives it a false altimeter reading, where it shows it to be much higher than it really is, and when the system tries to compensate for it, it just lands itself into a field somewhere. So on the flip side, U.S. electronic warfare's, I won't say total crap, but it's at least a good generation behind Russia's, and they can't block, at least as of right now, they can't block the Russian FOBs or JDAMs. Now the difference is too, this wave of FOBs is that they are fuel air bomb. It's not just a JDAM put on an iron bomb. They're fuel air bomb. So basically, what a fuel air bomb is, it's a bomb with full of gasoline, right? Aerosolized gasoline. As the bomb is coming down at a certain distance, it starts releasing this big cloud of gasoline vapor, and above the ground it detonates itself. It just creates this giant fireball. It does a very good job at sucking oxygen out of people's lungs and collapsing their lungs, so they don't have to be killed right off by the actual explosion. The shock wave and the vacuum that it creates, because that big cloud of gas, vaporized gasoline, petro, benzene in Russian, it explodes and it burns up the oxygen, and it sucks the oxygen in. And the more closed the area that the person's in, the more he's affected by it. So you got the contusion, contusion wave going out that causes problems. And then you've got the oxygen being sucked out of people's lungs, especially if they happen to be in buildings. When it blows up near a building or into a building, it'll just suck all the oxygen out of the tunnels and everything else, and just collapse their lungs, and they'll die from that. So either way, as opposed to American JDAMs are basically just are iron bombs. These are actually fuel air bombs. But again, the technology can be applied to any iron bomb, anywhere, any old gravity bomb, and it does make a big difference. The explosions are very hard, are very big. The 3,000 kilogram bomb, 3 ton. I mean, it'll level everything around it, and it'll actually move the earth. So you could be far within 50 meters or even 100 meters of it in a trench, and it'll collapse the trench because it's actually moving the earth. It's a seismic effect.
And isn't it also capable of completely destroying concrete, fortified, steel fortified underground bunkers where command centers are held and troops are gathered? Isn't it capable of doing that? Because I read that the Ukrainian soldiers are terrified of those FABs.
Yes and no. It depends. I mean, if you're talking about a bunker on the front line, yeah, it'll collapse it. I mean, it'll wipe. It can make if it's a ground explosion, a 3,000 ton bomb will make a crater that's about 10 to 12 meters deep. So you're talking about 3 stories. Will it take out a NATO bunker that's 6 to 8 stories underground? No, it will not. And it could take out the upper levels. those bunkers are taken out by more advanced munitions. Iskandar missiles, Kinjal missiles, caliber missiles, missiles that are made for bunker busters. And what that does is, what a bunker buster is, it's a missile that has a penetrative ability. So it goes through the roof and it could go through several floors, either with just by kinetic penetration or with a forward charge explosive that blasts through, and as the missile falls through. And then at a certain depth, the missile explodes and levels everything inside. But these are gravity bombs. These are guided gravity bombs. Now, if a plane gets up, first of all, they're not fighters. They can be fighter bombers in Russian maybe, or bombers. But regular fighters don't carry these kinds of munitions. Fighters are interceptors. They carry air-to-air missiles. They carry harm missiles, anti-radar missiles. They'll carry machine guns. They've got autocannons on. They're made to intercept other planes. A fighter bomber is a strafing aircraft. It can do some fighter missions, but it's not that effective. It's more of a strafing aircraft, anti-land forces, as opposed to a dedicated bomber. So at full altitude, when dropped, a JDAM can glide 80 kilometers. Or a FAB can glide 80 kilometers. So the planes can stay pretty far outside of range. One of the reasons the Patriot missiles were destroyed, Patriot systems were destroyed, is they had to pull them up closer to the battlefield to try to get the planes at 70 plus kilometers. And once they pulled them up close enough to get at our planes that were dropping the FOBs, they were in range of a lot of other munitions, and they were taken out.
Yeah, a couple of things. You mentioned the Patriot systems. The German defense minister, a woman, never in uniform, Annalena Baerbock, reported today that Patriot reserves are exhausted. Germany doesn't have much more, if anything, to send them, and now they're scouring the globe for more Patriot missiles to be destroyed. But you mentioned a coming offensive. And a number of people have been talking about that, but I don't think so much recently. Something that's not really been reported since January, 100,000 Russians have enlisted as contract soldiers, and some 16,000 since March 22nd, the Crocus City Hall massacre. How will Russia use or deploy these? And maybe more important than that, doesn't Russia have, several 100,000 troops ready to join this offensive that you were talking about? What can you tell me more about that?
One correction, Annalena Baerbock, 360. She said, because Putin stormed around 360, what she meant was 180. Math isn't her strong point. Is the foreign minister of Germany. So yeah, she's never in uniform. Her suit pants are her usual uniform. She's clueless. That's a whole different thing. You don't let Greens near power, and there you go is the reason. The recruitment has gone up about almost threefold since the terrorist attack, and they always ask the recruits why you want to join up, and it's all right now revenge. So you don't scare Russians with terrorism. You piss Russians off, and it's what's going to happen right now, in my view. The big war in Europe is coming. It's not going to roll off right off the bat. It's going to take a year and a half, 2 years to ramp up. That doesn't mean that suddenly peace is going to break out in Ukraine. They're still going to be fighting in Ukraine. What these French troops are eventually going to wind up in Ukraine, they're a triple line. They're going to get massacred. They've already been told. Then they will. And that's supposed to spur the rest of Europe on for mass mobilization and preparation for war. And part of it has already been done. The 29th of March, which for Catholics and Protestants was Holy Friday, Clean Friday. The Polish government enacted enacted draft laws. Draft laws have been out since 2006, so they haven't had a draft in 16 years. It's back, 17 years actually. It's back, and it's not only back, but they're mobilizing 200,000 reservists plus lots and lots of civilians, doctors, nurses, translators, for emergency training. So basically doubling their military size instantly with these reservists. One. Two, that, like I said, that was 29th of March, and mobilization is going to be next 2 weeks. Last week, the Defense Ministry of Romania submitted a bill to Parliament that will allow the Romanian army to operate outside of Romania's borders to defend ethnic Romanians, which are Moldovians, but they're not, which are ethnic Romanians in Bessarabia, ethnic Romanians in Pridnestrovia, which are not Romanians, but okay, and southwestern Ukraine. So basically, they're going forward now. To understand what that means, first of all, Moldova and Romania are not the same countries. They have similar languages, but unlike Romania, which Romania appeared when the Russian army in the 1880s liberated those territories from the Turks, and it was called Wallachia. The territory of Wallachia became Romania. It became the size it was after the Versailles Treaty, when they got Transylvania from Hungary, Austro-Hungarian Empire that was collapsed, and they got their Black Sea coast, where they got to expel the Bulgarians that were always living there as Bulgarians. Now they're looking for Moldova and Bessarabia and up to Odessa included, which they couldn't take during World War II because they got their butts kicked, because their balls punched up so hard they were pasting in the back of their throats. And I'm not mincing words. The Romanian army got exterminated. The Second Romanian Field Army, which was tasked with taking Odessa, encircled Odessa, took huge casualties getting to Odessa, encircled Odessa, had to pull in a lot of German Wehrmacht units to support them, and then entered Odessa 3 days after the Soviet troops did him out of Odessa by sea into Crimea. They waited 3 days because they were afraid to go in. Well, after Odessa fell, the Second Romanian Field Army was sent back to Romania and disbanded. Their casualties were so high, they were combat incapable. The First Romanian Army got up to Stalingrad, and there's a reason why the counteroffensive pincher movements went through the Romanians. Not through the Hungarians or the Italians or the German units. They went specifically through the Romanians, and they went through the Romanians. There was one Romanian infantry division that actually stood their ground for a whole day before surrendering. The other two divisions were wiped out, first with the artillery barrage, and then the waves of T-34 just ran right over them. And ended the great Romanian First Field Army's experience in the war. So the Romanians are pardon my French again, are shit for troops. They have been always shit for troops. And if you listen to them, they saved the Russian army from the Turks when the Russian army came to liberate them. The reality is, I mean, when the Romanians were trying to choose which side to enter in World War I, and this is 1916. German General Weinhardt, I think was his name, stated, if Romania enters on our side, it will take me 10 divisions to defend Romania from the Russians. If Romania enters on the Russian side, it will take me 10 divisions to conquer Romania. Either way, Romania is going to cost me 10 divisions. It's pretty close to right. As a matter of fact, the Brusilov offensive was cut partially shorter than it should have been, because they had to pull in a Russian corps to defend Romania, whose army collapsed almost instantly as soon as it came into contact with the Austro-Hungarians, the Germans, and the Bulgarians. Got their butts kicked all over the place. But they are now looking at those territories. And so Moldova is a medieval entity. as a country, as a separate country. Just to understand, Tsar David the Great of Moldova was allied with Tsar Ion Grozny, the feared, not the terrible. English propaganda when they mistranslated the name. So, and this is the 1500s. So Moldova's been around for a very long time. It's not part of Romania. But the Romanians and the Moldovan dictator in charge, she's got a Romanian passport. They want to annex all that areas. So what also has been noticed is that German police in uniform have showed up in Moldova. Now you ask, why the hell are Germans there? Very easy. Moldova is now starting mass mobilization for war, and the Moldovans don't want to fight. So you got Pridnestrovia in the east that is basically an autonomous republic that's been separate from Moldova from day one, and Gagarizia, if I remember the name correctly, is a province in southern Moldova that's been asking for Russian troops. They don't want to have anything to do with Moldova anymore. They're not going to go fight. So they have to be forced at gunpoint to go to the front. So this is what the situation is. So what's going to happen is, right now, neither side has the force to destroy the other side. I'm talking about NATO and Russia. Both armies, Russia's army is bigger, it's better prepared, has more equipment, but it's incapable of driving on Berlin, let alone Paris or London in a big war. That's something that's going to have to take time to build up. NATO is in a crap situation. It can send, if it sends its troops in right now, it can't do any kind of offensive toward Moscow. It's incapable. But they could hold the battlefield for a while. What's going to happen in the background is mass mobilization, which on an economical level is already being done. So then you get then you'll get a race who can mobilize their economies and their societies and their militaries faster to go on the offensive. Because sooner or later, it's going to come to realization in Moscow, if it hasn't already, that this is a war to the end. And when in the West they keep telling you this is a war to the end, preferably our end, of course, than their end for them, but and they keep telling you that Russia can't win, Russia has to be destroyed, Russia has to be humiliated, Russia has to be broken down into pieces. I mean, it becomes obvious there's nobody to negotiate. There cannot be any negotiation. The only negotiation with NATO is going to be unconditional surrender. They want our surrender and death. We will take their surrender, of course. I mean, that's where it's all running to. There are no adults in NATO. There's psychopaths in there, a whole cabal of them, Satanists, but no adults.
So you think this is going to continue for the next couple of 3 years before it's a direct war between Russia and the EU, NATO?
Well, I think it's going to be a year to a year and a half as both sides are ramping up. How long the war takes once that happens, I don't know. Hopefully, they'll still be there, living alive at the end of it, carrying a Russian flag. But we'll live and see. That's all in God's hands. We'll each do what we can. But I mean, that's where it's at.
Yeah. Wow.
I don't think all NATO countries. I don't think all NATO countries will participate. That's a different issue. I think in Greece, more likely you'll have a revolution. The Bulgarians, as a people, probably won't want to go fight. Turkey is a big question. Turkey's always a big question. Whose side they're going to fight or not. Hungarians, at least at the government level that they're at right now, aren't going to fight. Neither will the Slovaks. And then you start questioning the competency of any military force. Italians were never good soldiers, particularly. Not modern Italians, anyways. The Spanish and the Portuguese. But the other countries, even though they have weak militaries like Germany and England, if they're given a year to a year and a half of actual mobilization, they can get enough divisions up. Granted, they're going to lose a lot of people because they're going to be absolutely green divisions with no combat experience. but they'll get them up and they'll get them equipped. The U.S., I think, will run the role of the deep supply chain. U.S. isn't going to run to get in this fight. Now, if NATO is winning, and it's obvious NATO's winning, yeah, the U.S. will come in there and plant its flag and say, yeah, we won, we did it all. But the reality, I think the U.S. is going to sit back and make money off it. It's got its idiot children in Europe fighting against Russia, and for many of them, it's going to be suicide by Russian, and the U.S. is going to just be making money off of it.
All right. So, what do you think about this? It was just reported that Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of J.P. Morgan, the United States' largest bank, he's been warning about an economic recession, an economic collapse. And it was just reported in his annual report to his shareholders, stockholders, he said that the forecast for the United States is dire because of the geopolitical tensions going on, geopolitical in the world, and that the United States is involved in, political polarization at home, and huge government spending, not just on weapons, but the national debt is going up to $36 trillion. They can't even pay the interest off. And then he said because China is executing a more comprehensive economic strategy than the United States, basically he's saying that China is kicking the United States in the teeth with their own game. What are your thoughts on whether this prediction, if it comes true, I happen to think the United States and the Western economy is on the brink of collapse. But what are your thoughts in terms of how that would affect this conflict in Ukraine and then a potential expansion into parts of Europe? Your thoughts?
Well, look, everybody who holds American government debt is going to get one hell of a haircut, probably about shoulder level haircut. Look, I love these bankers that are telling you all this news. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. Anybody that has any inkling of economics and finance figured that out about 7-8 years ago, if not longer. What the issue here is short-term bond rates, and bond rates. What you're looking at is the cost of investment for the U.S. government, cost of printing money. Historically, bond rates were at 5 to 5.5%. For the last 20 plus years, closer to almost 30 years, really the last 20 years. The U.S. has even gotten to a point where there were negative rates. Where holding the money actually lost you money, or holding the debt. And most of the debts were historically extremely low rates, 0.5%, 1%, and so on. Well, what happened is the rates returned to historical norms, which sooner or later they were bound to do. So what you have now is rates at around 5%. What that means, rates at 5%, is at present the U.S. government is spending about $1 trillion, $100 billion to service the debt. That's not to cut the debt out. That's to pay the interest on the debt. And the problem is the vast majority of the American government's debt is in short-term bonds. These are 6 months to 5-year bonds, and most of them are coming up for are in a phase of renewal this year. What that means is they have to be paid out, and new bonds have to be issued. So these bonds, the old bonds, are issued at a set. When you issue the bond, whatever the bond rate is, it sticks to the end of the bond. So the bond rates were very, very low. But as these bonds end and they have to be paid out in full, and new bonds have to be issued because U.S. government ain't got no money to pay for its own, it has to it's taken in and it's paying out a hell of a lot more than it's taken in on taxes. So new bonds have to be issued, except they're now issued at 5%, 5 to 5.5.
Uh-oh. We lost Stas. We're going to wait a second to see if he's going to come back. Right when it was getting interesting, I can't see how the United States can stay afloat, given all of the problems that it has. It's basically bankrupt. The de-dollarization process is going ahead at warp speed. I just read today that the dollar is not being used on the Russian stock market. They're using the Chinese yuan. And so it doesn't look good from my perspective for the future of funding not only the war in Ukraine, but this potential of a larger Russia-NATO war. I wish Stas was still here because I don't see that coming. And he started to talk about an upcoming major offensive by the Russians. I think if that does take place, Russia is going to take off the gloves and will probably have to go all the way to Kiev and Western Ukraine, and is also all the way down to Odessa. I don't see anything else happening. Well, I want to thank our viewers, and thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and we'll see you the next time. For now, I don't know what happened to Stas, but very much appreciate his insight.